Extreme environmentalism is in danger of becoming an apocalyptic religion for people who have lost faith for whatever reason in traditional religions.
Leon Fontaine is away today. My name is Jeremy Prest, and our Return to Reason guest today is the co-author of a book called Superabundance. It might surprise you to hear that our world is actually getting exponentially better. It isn't the doom and gloom we are fed daily by the legacy media. Marian L. Tupy is a world-renowned speaker, editor of humanprogress.org, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute Center for Global Liberty and Prosperity, and the co-author of the Simon Project. He specializes in globalization and global well-being, politics, and economics.
Today, a special episode of Return to Reason, where knowledge and wisdom intersect.
Welcome to today's show, Marian. It's so good to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You know, when we secured this interview and we started to approach this topic, honestly, I was excited. You know, it's an interesting thing what's going on in the world today, and I would love to flesh that out as we walk through your book. But there seems to be this doom and gloom mentality going through all of news, through universities, through students. You see people going into museums and trashing art for climate activism. You see all sorts of these things going on all over the world, and the news seems to be magnifying it. So when we got a hold of your book, it was very contrary to that idea. It was actually saying that there's an abundance, that as time goes on, things are getting better. So I guess I want to ask you, what inspired you to write this book, and what are you hoping to accomplish with this book?
Well, we started about 5 years ago trying to update the famous Simon Ehrlich wager. For the listeners who don't know, Simon was an economist living in Maryland, working at the University of Maryland, and Paul Ehrlich, who is still alive, is a biologist at Stanford University. And basically in 1980, they made a bet. Paul Ehrlich was arguing that as population increased, prices of resources would go up and resources would become more scarce. And Julian Simon, who was an economist, was arguing that as population increased, prices of resources would go down and they would become more abundant. And that wager came to an end in 1990, and Simon won. So we were just looking at first to update the wager to 2018 or 2020. And then we put a different spin on it. Simon and Ehrlich worked with real prices, meaning inflation-adjusted prices, which is how economists normally look at things. But we looked at prices of resources from the perspective of human wages. In other words, how long you have to work in order to afford something, how many minutes and hours you have to afford. You have to work to afford a bag of oranges or a pound of bananas and things like that. And that actually improved on the wager. Simon would have won by an even bigger margin. And that is because human productivity and innovation translates not only into declining prices of resources, the abundance of resources, the fact that they're becoming more cheaper, but also our wages are going up at the same time. So once you combine these two values in one, which is what we call time price, how long you have to work to buy something, what we found was that it was an even more impressive appreciation in human flourishing.
And so, because one of the things that's being preached from the mountaintops, it feels like, is that overpopulation, we're killing this world, there's not enough to go around. But you're saying the complete flip side of that is, as we grow, we become more innovative, we become more capable of actually resourcing ourselves. Is that accurate?
That's correct. I mean, Simon already pointed out that the human brain is the ultimate resource. In other words, every new baby born into the world is not just born with an empty stomach, but also a brain. And so the more brains you have, talking to each other, having the freedom of speech, associating, publishing, investing in the stock market, profiting from their innovations, the more likely it is that you are going to come up with a solution to a problem. Now, the problem that you may be facing is maybe a pathogen. You need to come up with a drug or a vaccine in short order. Maybe what you're looking for is a long-term solution to cancer, or maybe it is that you are looking for solutions to environmental problems. Environmental problems, in my estimation, are just technical problems that we can solve if we have more knowledge. A perfect example of that would be if every farmer in the world became as productive as a Canadian or an American farmer, we could feed 10 billion people very easily and at the same time return land to nature. Yeah. So right now the problem is that much of the world's agriculture is not terribly productive. People just don't produce as much as they could per acre of land. Yeah. But if they became as productive as Americans, then we could just send all bunch of land back to nature so the biosphere can reconstitute itself. We could plant many more trees and things like that. It's already happening. Yeah. It could be happening at a faster pace.
Well, I remember I went fishing we went fishing with some friends, and we live in Canada, one of the largest countries in the world. And when you're being preached about overpopulation and how there's not enough space and there's not enough to go around, where we went, we had to get into a float plane because there's no roads to go there. And so as we get in this plane, we start flying as far as you can see for hours. There's not a home, not a house, not a business, just lakes, trees, forests, as far as you can see. And so I remember on that plane, we started to discuss, like, what are they talking about? Like, how are we even getting, like, overpopulation? Like, it seems almost completely absurd. But then you turn on CNN, and a phrase we like to use sometimes about CNN is just constant negative news. So, like, they even sometimes preach the fact that the human race is a plague to the earth. But like, my question to you, I guess, is why is it that we're getting this? Why are they preaching this to us?
By the way, it's the same in the United States. You leave Washington, D.C., where I live, and 5 miles from the city center, you encounter deer and wildlife and snakes and whatever. The fact is that the United States and Canada are basically empty, to simplify things. But don't forget one more thing, and that is this trend, this urbanization trend, which is happening in the world. By 2050, 80% of all of humanity will be living in the cities. What does that mean? That means that that we are basically emptying the land. We are going to the cities, and so animals will be able to reconstitute themselves, and they are very good at doing that. Yeah. I'm reminded of Chernobyl and the fact that now it's a wildlife refuge where the animals are roaming freely. Why? Because humans have disappeared. Apparently, human intervention with nature is more destructive than even nuclear explosions. And we know that also from the Bikini Atoll. American government had dropped 23 nuclear devices onto Bikini Atoll in the 1950s. Recently, marine biologists went there and found the marine life flourishing like you wouldn't tell. So nature has its way of reconstituting themselves as soon as we depart. Now, why is there so much negativity in the news? I think it's because we have evolved to be pessimistic. We have evolved to prioritize negative news. So your brain has only so much computing power, and you are ingesting at any point in time, a lot of information about your surroundings. And so the brain needs to prioritize things which are potentially dangerous. Yeah. And it is, and the region of the brain that prioritizes danger, amygdala, is directly linked to your nervous system. So, for example, if you're walking through a forest and you see a branch that may look like a snake, you will jump away.
Your fight or flight will kick in.
Fight or flight will kick in. And within half a second after that, maybe even shorter, half a second or so, you will realize that it's just a branch because your nervous system is acting at a quicker pace than the other part of your brain, which is then able to affix the branch to something, to a concept which is not a snake. Yeah. So we have evolved to do that because the world was much less pleasant place to live in, and if you wanted to survive, you had to constantly focus on the negative, and that is why, of course, the newspapers always lead with horrible stories. If it bleeds, it leads. That's not just a saying; it's the reality. People are much more likely to pick up a newspaper and give you $2 or whatever if they see something more horrific happening on the front page.
Yeah, one of the things I guess I want to ask you too is it, and I can only speak to the world that I live in Canada, first world country, first world nation. Why is it is it democracy where we're polarizing the left versus the right? Is vote for me and everyone else is bad, so I'll be the hero that saves the day, and when these guys get elected, these guys call these guys the opposition. So have we created this storm through the polarization of voting?
I cannot speak about Canada. I can tell you about the United States. We do not have a political constituency or political party with an incentive to talk about good things going on in the world. So when Trump is in power, all the progressives will say, oh, the world is ending, we have to emigrate, everything is going to hell because, there is an election in 2 years and then in 4 years. So you don't want to give any credit to Trump. When Biden is in power, same thing happens. All the Republicans are saying everything is going to hell, nothing is working out, we all have to emigrate. So the point is that we don't have a constituency for reminding people that the world is actually not ending, not going to hell. And that is maybe connected to the fact that the government has started to play much bigger of a role in our lives. In 18th century Britain, you still had a lot of corruption and life was difficult, but government didn't matter so much because it influenced only a very narrow sliver of life. But now, when the government can opine about anything, it can imprison you at home during the COVID pandemic. It can tell you, what foods to eat, how to educate your children, and so forth. Politics have become polarized, not just because of social media, etc. Politics is primarily polarized, in my view, that's just my opinion, because the government does so much that when the opposition takes charge, basically many of your basic values are threatened.
What are your thoughts when it comes to when it comes to climate modeling and how almost all of the predictions for the future is based on modeling? What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not a specialist on climate change. I want to make that very clear. I accept that the world is lukewarming. I accept that CO2 has a role to play in it, and I accept that human beings contribute to increasing CO2 into the atmosphere. However, we have to be aware that what the United Nations produces and what the public hears through the medium of the press are very different things, and that all the nuance, all the uncertainty, which is included in the IPCC documents, gets filtered out of the system precisely because in order to sell newspapers or make you click on a news story on the internet, you have to basically over-dramatize things.
Your book is full of so many things, and we've only got so much time here to pick your brain. And there's a few things I want to kind of get to. There's something that I saw you talk about. You were talking about population. And you're talking about actually birth rates, and there's a few things that you mentioned. One of the things that I find that's being talked about a lot is actually that we're in a negative growth in a lot of places in the world as far as birth rate goes. Again, it kind of goes against what's being spoken about, taught about. But a lot of talk about China, actually, that they're in a decline, even though they're over 1 billion people. What are your thoughts on the birth rate for the world?
Yeah, so in 107 countries out of 190, birth rates are below replacement level. Replacement level is basically a statistic which says you need to have, on average, 2.1 children per woman per lifetime to keep the population stable.
Okay,
that's
so let's just flesh that out for a second. So if they're not at that number, then the population will begin to get older and older, and then there's no one to support that. Is that correct?
That's part of it, but the population just stops expanding. If it's just 2.1 child per woman per lifetime, then we are talking about keeping the population stable. But in 107 countries out of 190, it's below the replacement level, which means that they may be growing statistically in a sense that it's not shown yet. The fact that at some point in the future, in the near future, their populations are going to start declining if they are not declining already. And that means that the world will stop growing in about 2060. And after that, it will start declining. And we may have a problem with underpopulation rather than overpopulation. China is a perfect example of a self-inflicted wound, like you would expect from a communist regime. Yeah. They had a one-child policy which was brutally enforced through enforced sterilization and abortions and things like that, unwanted abortions. And between 1978 and 2015, and the Chinese are very proud in saying that they prevented the birth of 400 million people. But now the problem, of course, is that China has lost its most populous country status to India this year. And their population pyramid doesn't look like a healthy pyramid. A healthy pyramid looks something like this, with a lot of young people at the bottom and few people on top, but it looks more like this. And they have that bulge of people who are older, who are now getting into the retirement age, and they don't have young people to support them in retirement, but they also cannot keep the current size of the economy if you don't have people whom you're going to be employing in all the industries which need to be populated by new workers.
Yeah, it'll exponentially get worse as time goes on.
Yes.
Wow, that's absolutely wild. I guess a question I have for you is, and this is the quote, it says, "Artists don't create society, they reflect it." And so I want to ask you, so when we see art or movies or content being created that is kind of portraying that apocalyptic view that something has to happen or the world is done, what came first, do you think? Do you think that the artist is portraying this is where we're going, or that they're just reflecting society and this is where we're at? Like, what is with art and movies everywhere you look that are so apocalyptic pointing to this worldview of the world is ending?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I certainly hope I didn't write it. I think
no, it's not you.
I think that quote comes from someone else. Well, what I can tell you is that even though the world has improved tremendously along so many different dimensions of human well-being since 1950, in every single decade after 1950, the number of apocalyptic movies has actually increased. So over the last 70 years of movie making, every decade saw more and more apocalyptic movies, with one exception, and that was the 1990s. And I think that may have been because there was a lot of optimism in the world when the Cold War ended without a war. The communist world just disappeared. So what we do know is that there is more and more apocalyptic movies, even though the world is improving. So my sort of first gut reaction would be that it is the movie making which contributes to making us hyper anxious, and which is creating a sense that the world is much more dangerous than it is. Again, knowing that the world is getting better, but the number of apocalyptic movies is increasing, and with it also human anxiety, I would probably say that culture drives this, that that art contributes to it. I don't think it's probably not the only thing, but I would say I would suggest it's a contributor.
A couple last questions I want to kind of throw your way is, what are, like, I guess I want to pick your brain on the top 5 ways that the world has improved, because there's many. You go over all sorts of different ways, but what would you say are kind of, for the viewers to just get a quick synopsis on the benefits that have kind of happened over the years?
Well, we could be here for a very long time. I could talk about increased literacy, increased life expectancy, increased incomes per capita, decline in absolute poverty. But I will focus only on the environmental trends, which are getting better, that people will not know. Your listeners will not know because they never read about it in newspapers, but it's just a click away. Yeah. One thing is, of course, greening of the planet. We have more foliage in the world, more luscious forests and bushes and things like that, because CO2, whilst it is contributing to global warming, is also plant food. This is something that you should be able to learn in biology and chemistry in the first year.
Well, they use CO2 producers in greenhouses, correct?
Precisely. Yeah. So they pump CO2 into greenhouses in order to make tomatoes and cucumbers grow faster. Another thing is afforestation of the planet. In the last 20 years, the tree coverage in the United States rose by 35%, in Europe by 35%, and in China by something like 20% or so. So here you have greening of the planet, and afforestation. Another thing which is very exciting, and that is that the world is now filled with record number of nature reserves and also square mileage of ocean, which is protected from human exploitation and exploration. So part of the beauty of being rich and being a sophisticated society is that you can carve out a part of your land where you no longer have to farm and declare it Yosemite or a nature reserve. And also that you have the marines and ships and satellites which are able to monitor large chunks of the ocean to prevent Chinese ships from coming in and fishing. So that's another thing. A record number of record square mileage of the planet which is now reserved for the animals. Fourth would be aquaculture. Very exciting for me. One of the things that's going on in the world, which is undeniably true, is that we are overfishing. And so what you want to do is to get away from wild fishing as much as possible, and you want to start to produce as much fish as you can on fish farms. Yep. Now, these don't have to be primitive fish farms like pools and things like that. You can also produce a lot of fish, shrimp, and whatever else by simply cordoning off a part of the ocean and
controlling the environment,
controlling the environment like that. And already 50% of all the fish consumed in the world comes from aquaculture. So that's another perfect example of the way that the world is getting better.
So so if I'm interpreting you correctly, the world is in a good trajectory. The world's getting better. Would you agree with that?
Yes, so long as we keep on having people, and especially free people, to talk to each other, to publish, to think freely, to invest in the stock, in the marketplace in order to create new innovations and benefit from them, then I don't think there is any problem that free human beings cannot solve.
What is it that you would, if you could kind of encapsulate what you hope to accomplish with this book, with your talks? What is it you hope to push and get people to understand?
I would say that if we move the needle and convince people the world is not ending, and that people who are purveying this apocalyptic stuff are wrong and are doing a lot of harm, then we will have achieved something good. I want to make sure that people don't misunderstand me. I am an environmentally conscious person, and I'm surrounded by people who are self-declared environmentalists, rational environmentalists, people who are determined to have a future in which there is a balance between human flourishing and a cleaner, more beautiful planet. We all want to combine those two. Totally. But there is a substratum within the environmentalist movement, which is apocalyptic, which is fanatical, which has in the hierarchy of values of those people, there is no place for humanity. Yeah. They are anti-humanist very deliberately. They say the world would be much better without human beings in it, which is an insane idea because human beings are the only entity in the world capable of perceiving the planet through our senses. The animals don't care about the planet one whit. They care about eating, having sex, and not being eaten, but they don't appreciate the beauty of the planet. We do. So they are anti-humanists. They are antinatalists. They believe that humans children are a cancer on the planet, that if you have a baby, you are basically being selfish, don't take into account the wildlife and whatever. And it is these people that we need to combat. Extreme environmentalism is in danger of becoming an apocalyptic religion for people who have lost faith for whatever reason in traditional religions. I'm not personally religious, so I don't, I'm not saying anything. I'm not trying to make a case for traditional religion. What I am making a case for is the famous G.K. Chesterton quote that when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. And as we see a decline of traditional religion, what we see as an increase in alternative to traditional religions, including environmental extremism, which is a replacement for that. And it's quite extraordinary to see in environmentalism these religious components. The Garden of Eden, which is just the world before industrialization.
Yeah.
They have their own saints like Greta Thunberg. They have their own priesthoods like IPCC. They have their own devils.
Very interesting.
They have their own devils like like fossil fuel companies. They even have indulgences where you can do whatever wrong and then it's forgiven if you pay up.
One of the thoughts that I thought was brilliant was that you talked about there's this whole idea out there about how there's only so many atoms in the world to be used, and if we consume them all, like it's almost like a pie. If we're all going to share a pie, there's only so much to go around. But I loved how. And jump in wherever I get this wrong, but you talked about how like one way that we reorganize atoms on our planet is simply by like something like an iPhone or a phone. Whereas you would use this phone, the phone can be a calculator, it can be a notepad, it can be a phone, it can be so the list goes on and on. Whereas back in the day, you needed 20 different devices to do that. So through our innovation, we're becoming more efficient and actually not producing as much things because of our innovation.
Yes, that particular process is called dematerialization, where this little thing in my hand serves as a map, as a pad, as a television set, as a camera, a radio, all sorts of things that you would in the old days you would need in order to get around. They're all and just many fewer atoms and less energy. Yeah. But yes, the world has finite number of atoms, but the value you can get from those atoms is infinite. Think about something as simple as a grain of sand. It's been on the planet for billions of years. Yeah. And then about 5,000 years ago, people suddenly figured out that if you heat sand to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, you can get glass beads and later glass jars. Yeah. And then we started using sand to create window panes, and with every single step of the way we got more value out of the same commodity, which is a grain of sand. And of course now sand is turned into glass, which is used in fiber optic cables, which send information around the world at the speed close to the speed of light, worth trillions of dollars in value. So there you can see how this process, it's still just a grain of sand, but the value that we can create out of that has increased exponentially over the last 5,000 years. I
can't thank you enough for joining us today. Like I said, just getting your perspective on a lot of these angles is extremely refreshing, because like I said, it seems like whatever app you open or whatever television program you turn on, it's so doom and gloom. And so keep doing what you're doing. Where can people grab your book from if they're looking for it?
Well, thank you very much for those kind words. I especially hope that people will buy it for their children. It's probably not a good book for somebody who's 10 years old, but an 18-year-old will understand it. Maybe a good back to college sort of gift for Christmas. But learn anything you want to know about the book can be gotten for free at superabundance.com. And if after reading the introduction you decide that you want to buy the book, please go to amazon.com, amazon.ca, or basically any larger bookstore like Walmart or Barnes & Nobles. So thank you for that.
Well, again, Marian, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we really appreciate all your insight on these topics. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Return to Reason. I'd like to read your thoughts in the comments section below. And pay it forward. Share this video with someone. Hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so that you're notified every time I post a new video.